Early in my career, for about 20 years, I lived, volunteered, and worked on and off in about 25 First Nations communities in Northern Ontario and the Yukon. This life-changing experience gave me my first opportunity to support people with autism and other developmental disabilities. One day I was working in my office in one of these communities and had just started to write a 300-page tribal council long-term care plan. At this tribal council, they had employed Diane, a band member with fetal alcohol syndrome and autism. After spending several hours reviewing my notes and organizing my thoughts, I started to write. Soon I heard someone coming down the hall to my office. I looked up to see Diane, who frequently came by to chat with me when I was in the community. "What are you doing?" she asked. Even before her question was asked, I noticed frustration building in me as I anticipated having to leave my train of thought to socialize with her. In spite of this, I looked up and gave a brief, "Oh, I'm just writing a report." "About what?" she asked. My mindless mind doubled down on my conflicted feelings. Without my noticing it, my self-preservation instincts had already started to impersonalize my responses. At one level, I wanted to listen to her, but knew that I would lose some important thoughts needed for my report. So my tuning out prevailed. Diane tried to turn the conversation to what she wanted to discuss. I feel like, yesterday when, I don't like it when her struggles to share her feelings made my dilemma all the more tangible. I should have been a better listener. I glanced over and noticed that her facial expression had changed. I said, "Oh yeah," unconsciously trying to keep the conversation brief and not too heavy. My inner voice was saying, "Why today? Why now?" I should have closed the office door, but I asked reluctantly, "You okay?" As she started to pour out her feelings, I said to myself, "This is going to take a while, time I don't have." I smiled and she continued, but my mind was drifting back to the report. Should I push for the executive director too? What will that cost? I don't know how long I was absent or what I missed. I rejoined the conversation and renewed my efforts to concentrate and care. And so it goes. Diane finally finished and said, "Thank you. I feel better." I said, "You're welcome." But it wasn't until driving home that night that I stumbled onto the question, how welcome was she? My mindless, tuned-out mind hardly gave her any space to resolve her fears. My closed heart barely acknowledged her pain. I was so busy judging, resisting, internally freaking out that I barely connected. In these early days, my mind clearly had a mind of its own, and it owned me. It would be some time later before I learned that it didn't have to be this way. This insight came during and after my clinical depression over 25 years ago when my twin sister was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. My Great Depression started my deeper journey inward to discover how I was frequently, in many of my personal and professional relationships, spaced out, tuned out, and freaked out to armor my heart against burnout. As my career in human health services progressed, I was blessed to meet several highly evolved teachers who showed me the meaning of authentic, conscious connecting. These skills started to keep me better focused and authentically caring regardless of my little boy's demands and tantrums, to distract me away from the truth of each painful moment. I learned how to identify and skillfully process those many painful moments of watching and hearing about injustice and unfairness in the lives of many Dianes. These sad moments, if not processed skillfully, that is without resistance, caused burnout for supporters. My mind slowly had less and less time to armor my heart with make-believe deadlines concerning the urgency of work priorities over people's needs. What a gift to discover that the way to escape suffering is to mindfully, equanimously turn 180 degrees back into the pain. This is the true path to calm within the chaos, and the only real place where resistance and the illusion of separateness can be transcended. While there are still times when my mindless mind is too formidable an opponent for my current level of awakened presence and compassion, and that is a very true statement, just knowing in the moment that it doesn't have to be this way seems more and more to weaken the power of these 4 outs. that is very true, and there are moments when certainly with even all my training, I still have to struggle to be as present as I need to be. But I can say this, that what you're going to learn today has a major, major impact on the possibility of not having to be driven by it. So the summary then, tune-out is typically how the spaced out self protects our self from burnout and freak out. So I just want to work with you for a little while and show you a model. This model, the course is actually built on. I've given you a handout with this little stair step on it. And I've built the course, this part of the course, on this model. So I'd like to talk to you about this idea that in all the situations that we have to work with, the more stressful we are, the more important this is. But even in our general relating to anyone, I've got this 5-step program, and it starts like I'm going to give it to you step by step, but eventually it becomes just a complete simultaneous process, actually. And I'm going to give you an example of it. But so the model, as you can see from what you're looking at, we catch yourself in the moment. Everyone here right now become aware that you're listening to me. So you're listening to my words, you're hearing what I'm saying, but you're now aware that you're doing it. You've just like doubled your conscious energy in this moment. So you're more aware, you're more alert, just knowing that you're here. I'll try to hold on to that for as long as you can. So that's what I call a catch moment. I'm going to give you a bit more on how that works. Now that you've caught yourself being here in this moment, now you can move to working with some calming strategies that I'm going to give you throughout the course. We're going to give you about a dozen really key calming strategies, ways to literally calm the autonomic nervous system, because that system is designed through the amygdala, the fight or flight brain and all, to fire, given any threats that we perceive to be. And if we are trained sufficiently, we can override some of that circuitry. And it's not honoring the power that that circuitry has over us leads to a lot of our problems in relationships. So that's the second piece you're going to learn about calming. We're going to talk about that every week we're together, but even a bit later on today. Then you see the next place. Now that I've caught myself in the moment, and I'm calmed, relatively speaking, now I can clarify the needs of this situation. I built the model like this because how many of us are trying to clarify needs of a situation when in fact we've been emotionally hijacked, our upper brain's already offline, right? It's just not even there. We say things and do things that are just not us. Like the you who's listening to me now, you've got your upper brain online. But when we get emotionally hijacked, that amygdala just takes it right offline. But here we are trying to implement, whatever, our best strategies that we have at the time and say things that are just, like you likely find yourself saying, did I say that? Did I really say that? Well, no, you didn't. You who is listening to me, you who are still aware that you're here doing this, you didn't say that. Your upper brain being offline, some other part of who you are said that. So we get clarity now. This is the third step. What should I do? Where should I go? Now we can take this fourth step, which is consciously connecting. And say every week we're together, you're going to hear more about these details. Conscious connecting means that I now interact with you in a way that's beyond my drivenness to be right, to be perfect, to be in control of things, to impress. All of these little rules and filters that we have, for the mindless person, the unconscious person, they drive a lot of who we are. But when we become consciously connecting, we connect in ways that transcend little boys and little girls. We just come to this moment with a higher order of wisdom, of caring, and we just start to not be driven by the stuff that usually takes us into these power struggles. And now that we've caught ourselves, calmed ourselves, clarified, now we're connected, now we can care, now we can connect, now we can be whoever we're with in whatever relationship. Let me just give you a very quick version of how this works, and I'm going to share a little story, true story. Joanne and I, my wife, every spring we go and take care of my mom and dad's grave. And we were coming back from from a gravesite one Sunday morning. It was a heavy rainstorm, and we came around a corner, and there'd been a terrible SUV accident. A vehicle had flipped, obviously, numerous times. We were there within a minute or two. The vehicle was still smoking. A couple of gals were there. One was directing traffic, and the other was on her cell phone, we assumed looking for help. And I pulled over, and Joanne went to see what was happening there, and I ran over to the vehicle to find what I was going to find. And there was a young man hanging out the window, and his hand and his shoulder was outside. And I looked to see what I could do in terms of first aid, but he was bleeding from so many sites I couldn't even see them. So I just took his hand and just said, "What's your name?" And his name's Ben, and I'm Peter, and just, "I'm going to be with you here, man. We've got help coming. You're going to be okay." And I just gave him that encouragement. I actually started talking to him a little about, watching his breathing, and I had him kind of labeling what he was experiencing in terms of breathing in, breathing out, just some basic stuff to keep his mind off what was happening, but also to maybe even help keep him alive a little bit longer. So I did this for about 10 minutes, and then the sirens started to come, and they were kind of like this distant noise, right? But they came, and some great jaws of life people came, and the paramedics and fire people and just the police, all that. And I just continued to work with him and did the best I could to keep him calm while they worked to saw this wreck off his mangled body. And it was like, I don't know, an hour and a half, an hour 45, and he was then pronounced dead. And I just sobbed like I'd known him all my life, but we were really just two strangers kind of hanging out on the side of the road. So I just left them then and went over and washed the blood off my hands in a puddle. And a police officer came up and was going to start to do business and whatnot. And I just looked at him, and he looked at me, and he put his book away. And he called me up the next day, and we talked about what happened. So that's pretty much, if you had been looking at that situation, you would have pretty much reported exactly as I reported. The best that I can remember, that's how it went down. But that was a very, very incomplete and limited way of knowing what was really happening at that day, because there was a whole world happening inside of me. And I pulled up to that scene and caught myself having kind of, with mindfulness, you catch yourself having thoughts, knowing you're having thoughts. You know how like right now you know you're here? Well, when you do enough mindfulness, which is what you're going to learn in the course, you actually can catch yourself having certain thoughts. And one of the thoughts that I had was, gosh, I got to stop. What can I do? I got first aid. I'm going to, even though the vehicle's smoldering, I got to see if I can pull someone out of there if they're still alive. So that was one thought. But I had another thought that I caught. And the thought was, I don't know if I'm going to get involved in this or not. I've got a life. I got grandkids. Help is coming. They'll be here within minutes anyway. I don't have the equipment. And these thoughts went in my mind as well, where I was really, really questioning, why should I get involved? And with the catching myself, I just calmed myself with what I'm going to teach you in the course around, mindfulness and just learning how to work with the body sensations and how to soften into that. And you're going to learn some really good skills on calming. But with that, then I could go to that third step of clarifying. I can make an informed choice. Yeah, I'm going to do this. I'll be in and out, maybe pull this man out or whatever I'm going to find. And so that was the first catch, calm, clarify. Then I ran over to him. I don't know if you've ever been involved in one of these, but like this slow motion thing, it seemed like it takes an hour to get there. It's kind of slow-mo. And as I went there, I could just see, frankly, resistance happening at each step along the way. But I just continued to work this idea of knowing I was there, bringing some sense of awareness and calming to the process. Got there, checked out what could I do, first aid. Like, as I say, bleeding from so many sites, I couldn't even find the sites. So I just knelt down and went to take his hand, and more resistance. Kid could have AIDS, like 1,000,001 chance, but resistance. But because I was somewhat aware, I was able to say, okay, this is a very justified risk, and let's take that hand and let's be with this person as much as I can. And so we just continued to talk and be a part of this, and I just tried to bring him this level of calm. And we started to connect in a way that's not like just, like you're talking to a buddy at a ballpark or something. You get into a point where, there was the risk still was there. There was this incredible situation. I'm not a doctor or anything, but this looked not good for this person. I mean, he was just crushed. He was upside down. The vehicle was just crushed right into his chest, right? The roof was up under his back, and it was whoa. And so it kind of brings you to a different level of connecting. I think that had a lot to do with that. I'd like to think my consciousness did too. But we were just two people hanging out, but it was a different level of hanging out, which is what I like to see we can get to in this conscious connecting that I'm going to teach you through the course. It's beyond ego, beyond little boys, beyond little girls. It's just this connecting beyond others. Through the course, I'm going to use a term called usness. You learn to just be connected to people in a different way. And so then he was pronounced dead, and just worked with that. And I got up and washed my hands, and a police officer came over. And I tell you, like, in a different time, if the police officer had said something, I likely would have been pretty upset. But we just looked at each other, and we just both knew that to not get talking. And he just said to me, he said, "Thanks for your help. That was great work." When he said, "Thanks for your help," it was great. I immediately had a feeling of shame, because I knew part of me didn't want to be there. And I caught myself having that, and calmed myself with that, and got some clarity on that. And so it's just this recycling, this idea of catch, come, clarify, connect, and back and forth and back and forth. And so that's the model that I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to teach you. And I'm going to show you the underpinnings of that in a moment. I'm going to show you 4 qualities it takes to make this happen, and then we're going to unfold this throughout this afternoon and through the course. Okay, so we'd like to now talk a little bit about something that's highly prevalent with all of us, and that's the potential to become emotionally hijacked. That's our emotions just going someplace where we don't want them to go, right, in a hijack sense. So we're going to talk a little bit about what causes hijacks, but more importantly, what to do about them. As a part of what we're trying to teach, we want to make sure that we really significantly enhance our resiliency to not be pulled into emotional hijacks. But a lot of folks don't really quite understand what the source of hijacks are. They feel that it's, these conditions that have just happened would hijack anyone, and that's not always the case. Sometimes we do have that where 5 people would be hijacked to the same extent and the same frequency as anyone else. But there's a lot of times we get emotionally hijacked, and we have to acknowledge that a friend of ours or a sibling or whatnot would not be hijacked to the same extent. So that has to do with the work we've been talking about around filters, and we're going to get a little bit more into showing you how that piece comes together with the mindfulness. And we're going to talk about the 4 tools as being the way to ensure that we improve the likelihood of not being emotionally hijacked. So that's the big picture on where we're going to go. Let's start with an example of a continuum around an emotional hijack. So this is a practical example. So an example of an emotional hijack continuum could go like this. Once we've got our tools in place, we've been practicing, I'm going to suggest that we're going to see the outcomes of these different steps. But I'm going to just articulate for you just briefly 5 different stages on what I consider to be the continuum of emotional self-regulation, which of course is the antidote to take care of emotional hijacks. So the first part on this continuum, we have virtually no emotional self-regulation. Like it's just, there's no awareness at the time of a situation taking place. We're not aware of being emotionally hijacked even, and it just happens, and we go through it. We say things that we're not our A game, we're not positive, and it just happens. And at this first level, like, we don't even know if there's been anything wrong with what we've done. We're driving home and kind of wondering what's for supper. Like, there's just no idea that that we've been involved in something that was less than optimal. The next level is what I call some limited self-regulation. So what's limited? Well, there's late awareness, so you're in an emotional hijack, but you don't really know it at the time. You're still just duking it out, as the little child survived, how to survive, and with our filters and all the rest of our stuff. And at the end of it, there is an idea, when you walk away, that you wish that had gone better. You're actually saying to yourself, that wasn't my best moment. And so there is a regret on what happened, and there is a commitment to do better next time. This is a big deal. This is great progress. Great progress. Now, these first two areas we've talked about, a lot of our population, live in these areas. So what we're teaching you is how to move beyond, quote, being normal. You always hear me saying that to be normal in our culture is not where you want to be. So then, now we're going to talk about some emotional self-regulation. So at the time, there is an awareness of being emotionally hijacked. So you're aware at the time, you're actually in it, and you're aware that you're being emotionally hijacked. But you don't have the ability to really shut it down yet. The trigger's cocked and it gets pulled. But in that moment, you're aware this is not going well. This is not going as I would like it to go. And that is, once again, great significance that comes from applying these four tools, the four tools of mindfulness, at the base, and then that self-understanding we've talked about around the filters, moving up in the now, self-management, and then being able to look at much better self-expression. You're now you're on the cusp of being able to be this better self-expression. The next step, this fourth step, I would say there's more self-regulation. You actually, at the time of the situation, there is some awareness of being emotionally hijacked, right? You catch yourself in this moment, right? And with some of the in-the-moment mindful self-regulation skills that we've been teaching you how to calm yourself, you actually lessen some of what's happening in that moment. You catch yourself, you calm yourself, you clarify needs. You will start some of that empathic listening that we've been talking about as a way to deal with this. So a major, major step forward. And finally, what we're going to call fuller self-regulation. At the time of the situation, there's ongoing awareness of and mindfulness of being in an emotional hijack, so you're aware of it. We're not saying this is going to shut down emotional hijacks. What we're saying is you're going to be becoming much more aware of it. And when you're aware, then your communications are much more likely to be useful, truthful, kind, and timely. Right? Those are the big ones that we've talked about. And therefore, there's really literally no to low emotional hijack. And we can catch yourself in that moment, calm, consciously connect throughout. Okay, and then ultimately we can, be caring in that situation. So that's just a touch of this continuum that we've talked about that I wanted to discuss a little bit more, with you. Because as we look at being able to regulate ourselves, this is some of the kind of things that come from it. So then, an obvious question is, how do we make sure that we're getting more into the likelihood of being that emotionally self-regulated person? Let's talk about normal consciousness. So, this is us, the untrained us. This is not a bad place to be. We're going to talk about 5 different levels of consciousness. They all have their place. But certainly only understanding consciousness. Remember, we've given you the example before about how we drive our car. We put the key in the ignition and we end up in our parking lot or someplace. This is normal consciousness. It's being, not fully conscious. Even when we're driving, remember we used the example of if the police officer was behind you, how you raise your level of consciousness. That shows you we've got more capacity, we've got more fuel in the tank that can be played. We have to learn how to use it. So this normal consciousness, pretty much people get being happy, being emotionally satisfied, fulfilled from taking care of needs. And we all have our needs taken care of. But for the average person who's not trained in more fuller options of consciousness, we find that they spend a lot of their life just doing, getting, having, bigger, better, more for me and mine. That's what I call the mantra of our culture, the mantra of normal consciousness. And it's being pretty driven by those. So we live in an age of over-consumerism, materialism. Gosh, like we're 10% of the world's population. We chew up 40% of the world's natural resources in North America. This is morally wrong, and it's just, we need to be moving beyond normal consciousness. So this is the era of I needs, and usually what we're, getting prepared through that, through life skills and academic qualifications and things like that. So there's another level of consciousness, and this is what we call reflective consciousness. So reflective consciousness, this is where we've showed you when we talked to you about these understandings of coming from the filters is one of the main areas. Knowing that it is not what happens in a situation, but it's how I perceive or interpret life's challenges. Therein is lying where our problem is. So that when we take on competence in this area of consciousness, we no longer believe that for us who are into perfectionism, that we have to be perfect all the time. Those of us who are into approval from other people, remember we went through these filters. We don't have to be getting approval from other people. It's nice if we do, but our self-worth doesn't depend on it. To be in control, it's good to be in control. But we also have to have a reality that we're in a planet that has lots of out-of-control situations. And we learn to deal with them as best we can from the tools that we're teaching. But to hold this rigid, that I need control, otherwise I'm going to be fearful or not. We've got work to do there. And then there's a group that, we think that we need to be treated fairly, but we have a distorted sense of fairness because maybe we came from a home that was more pampering or spoiling, the likes of that. And we can get addicted to comforts as well. So these are just some examples of the filters we talked to you about, but this is that reflective consciousness. And you do your work here, and you're going to be into the areas of I don't need these things in order to feel worthwhile, meaningful life, happiness. That's the major message that we're making here. And because we are recognizing that we need to be perceiving conditions that are taking place in different ways. And the tools that we've talked for that then are these faulty filters reprogramming, and more about that a bit later. And then this PFP brain mending, as we've been talking about throughout the course. So then next, we come to what we've been talking about in the course is mindfully being here now. So this is the third level of consciousness. And this is totally distinct, just like the other two are totally distinct from each other. This is a continuum. As I'm sharing with you, the fully awakened person can go up and down these different parts on this continuum and take a maximum opportunity from what they bring. So this is the place where you're learning to catch yourself being present. Peter knows he's here right now talking to you. You become aware that you're listening to me. That's a present moment. That's a catch moment, right? I learned how to calm myself through the exercises that we're teaching, and we're going to teach you another one right after my little riff here called stress rehearsal. So we're catching and calming these body sensations, feelings, and even our thoughts. We're clarifying the needs of each of the moments that we're in. And we get to a point where we're so conscious of what we're doing, we start to see things like our feelings and even our thoughts as not us. Remember we walked you through that example of where when you're doing your mindfulness, you've noticed that you, the observer, can just watch what's happening in your body sensations, which hold a lot of our stress. This is where the emotional hijacks come from, or where the lack of self-regulation comes from. But we can literally learn how to observe that, and we become the observer of thoughts and feelings and body sensations. And we do it enough, and a message starts to sink in. It says, if I can watch all these things happening, this tight chest when I get angry, or this gut that's rumbling when I get anxious, if I can start watching that and even skillfully process it a bit, then that means I'm not it. That's not what I am. I'm not those thoughts. I'm not those feelings. I'm not those body sensations. So we start looking at these situations as there is something. There is anger. There is upset. There is joy. There's happiness. But we start to bring a consciousness to our moments. that are very, very significant to be able to not be driven by the previous, particularly the normal consciousness or even the last one. There is respite from that. So we look at Be-Fit mindfulness, the exercises that we've talked about, the basic exercises that we've talked about to bring us to this level. So here you may recall I used a great little metaphor that we developed that says when we're mindless, which is usually in that normal consciousness, it's like we're in a movie theater watching a movie, we're fully engrossed in that movie, and then something happens that we become aware, oh, it's just a movie. And the emotions that the director and cast of characters have got us tight in, they soften. Oh goodness, that fear I had, it's just a movie. Well, believe it or not, we're living a movie called life, and we can bring our awareness to these moments in life. We get the same kind of relief as soon as we catch in. Peter's aware that he's talking to you right now. You're aware that you're listening to me. Once we catch ourselves, then the survival codes that we've been developing for tens of thousands of years no longer dominate the moment. They no longer dominate it because it's the conscious us, the mindful us, that brings us to this moment. So now it's skillfully processing the reactions that we're having with our body, our feelings, and our thinking process. So it's really an incredible gift to have. So then the next piece we look at, we've talked about this one, is transcending the illusion of our separateness. This is the next level, right? So this is even more complete in terms of consciousness. So what does this basically mean? When we do that previous step of mindfully catching ourselves, calming ourselves, clarifying the needs, we start to connect with people. Even in situations that are stressful, like where we would traditionally got pulled into an emotional hijack. In those moments now, we're conscious of being there, and we've been able to modify the body's reactions much more significantly than the previous level, and certainly significantly more than normal consciousness. And when we can modify those body feelings and images, talk and realizing they're not us, something really significant happens. We start to realize that we're not a lot different than other people. So this mind of ours that has been involved with our filters and that has been saying, oh yeah, good guy, bad guy, in groups, out groups, all of the inherited stuff that we talked about in that PFP, remember those primitive predispositions we've been talking about that we inherit from, thousands of years of evolution that set us into primitive survival codes of, protecting the people who are like us, the in groups, and not liking those that are, not like us. All of those start to keep this idea that we are separate. But as we start to realize that, oh, I'm watching this emotional situation come and go, I'm managing my stress that's coming in my body that would typically get me freaking out more and emotional. No, it's not happening now. And a couple of things just pop into your mind, and this will happen every time you're into a situation of intensity with someone else or a life situation. You catch yourself saying, wow, if this is happening to me right now with my training and my awareness, that's got to be happening to those people over there. So I know that these reactions are just a primitive me, a me that comes up when I'm really not playing my A game of being conscious. I know that's my situation. So you start to realize when people are beating on you somehow, verbally, really doing whatever they're doing here, you start to realize they're driven by this PFP as well, these primitive dispositions, these filters and these brain primes. So you start to realize their predicament. And as you start to realize the predicament they're in. You only have to have 5 seconds of it in an emotional hijack, and you start to soften. Your heart starts to open because you see the predicament that other people are in. You get more involved, you're going to start saying, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for that person being stuck with that PFP. Because this is literally what's happening. Because a lot of what we are has not been of our own making. We talked to you about this idea of free will. And remember, when we shared with you a little bit that that our free will is not as free as we think it is, because things just pop into our mind. I ask you to just look at two people, bring with free will two people into your awareness. And when you did that, I asked you, you started to say, well, I didn't really directly bring them in, they just kind of popped in. Well, that's an example of having low free will. But as we get more and more aware and awakened, we start to have more opportunities for free will. And one of the first ones is realizing the person that right now that I'm struggling with is in a real dilemma, a real predicament, because they don't even know there's a difference. At least you who've gone through this training, you know there's a difference now. You know there's a difference in terms of just normal consciousness and where you can be. And this is what starts to happen in this level. When we take you through a mindfulness exercise, or when you've been doing your mindfulness exercises for your homework, you're noticing something really interesting. When you come out of, or when you're in that exercise, and you've got a pretty good game going. You're just watching, your thoughts arising and falling away. You're just watching some feelings just arising and falling away. You're just being with this process as best you can with the training you've had now. When you start to do that, just consider this. When you're doing that, and someone else who's doing that as well, you're both in the same mental state. Where if you're just driven by your filters and your ego and all of those things that cause emotional self-regulation difficulties, when you're just in those levels of consciousness, there's two separate critters, right? Just, almost ready to duke it out sometimes. But when you're both mindful, you are pretty much the same. I mean, you're coming from the same place in your brain. There's not the content of prejudice or bias or in-group or out-group. You're both hanging kind of in the same way. That's a significant revelation, that is actually possible. So this is where then we can really be strongly committed to relieve others' suffering. This is not just fake it till you make it. This is not doing that because that's the thing I should do, No. You actually have unconditional, authentic kindness and caring for all others and above all others, regardless of feelings about them. So you start to realize through this awakening process that we are not our feelings. They're just these primordial messaging systems that have kept us safe and will continue to keep us safe, but very primitive, just coming from basic architecture. We are much more than that. We are more fuller consciousness. So then we start to get fulfillment from authentically just caring for people and wanting to either restart a relationship that's been struggling or to depart, but we do that with an open heart. That's what comes from doing this. So then, service kind of just starts to flow without effort. Our vocations of being support professionals, being an adult child, taking care of mom and dad in their later years, being a parent, your kids, being a sibling. I mean, all these relationships start to now take on a really different look because it's an awareness that there's a lot of connectedness that heretofore you didn't see because you're just looking at egos and filters and whatnot. So there's more to it than that. So this is why I say here we go from me to we. That's just a little way of just acknowledging what we're looking at. And we do this compassion practice and stress rehearsal, which we're going to do shortly, just to show you how this works, right? And then finally, this last state of consciousness, where we're just talking about being in the flow of nature. This starts to sound, for some people, oh, that's too far out there. Well, it's not, because you're experiencing this level really many moments that you're not aware of. Because what happens when you stop being driven by this doing, getting, having, bigger, better, more? You start to develop an ability to not be having your natural body, mind, resisting what's going on. You see, resisting is a big problem. We can have a lot of things coming into us, and we have to sort them out cognitively, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. We activate plans to deal with challenging behaviors. We activate a lot of these tools. But in that whole process of when we're making and shaking in the world, we're teaching ourselves not to resist what's going on in here. Out here, we passionately work to change objective reality that should be changed. We've been sharing that with you throughout the training. But in here, we can literally be equanimous, balanced, in the flow of what's happening here, if you will, But it just means that we're not gripped and driven by these primordial, ancestral, inherited kinds of ways of being in these moments. So we start to develop then this capacity. And this capacity finds us being not driven by this resisting this stuff, but just internally here being able to flow with it. And we also learn that if we get really stuck into gobbling up or trying to get more and craving the good stuff, that's going to make us less than happy as well. And that causes a lot of lacking emotional self-regulation, because we're just so addicted to having more of the good stuff. And more of the good stuff is not getting into the flow of what is happening. So it's a way then you can literally become the experience of who we are and what we are. And that's our potential. The more time you spend in doing these kinds of tools we're working with here, the more you're going to be emotionally self-regulated. And once again, this is for your vocation, but it's also for your personal life. And staying with the tools that we're teaching you is the key. You've heard me say it several times. You can't drift to the top of a mountain. You got to climb it. That's the downside of anything that we teach, you know. We're not quick fixers. We're deep fixers, but we ain't quick fixers. That's the nature of, frankly, it's the nature of nature. Look at anything that's a quick fix and see how long it lasts or how deep it is. Lots of imposters. There's lots of kind of quick fixes. You know, take a trip to Jamaica or whatever your cruise or your shopping mall or your whatever. But that's not the depth of what we're talking about. What we're talking about is being able to be significantly more complete in the world that we're living in. And when the inevitable tough times come, which they are, it's the planet we live on, right? You're not going to be nearly as pulled into the negativity of what you're looking at.